One of my favorite life quotes is by Henry Nouwen. He says, gratitude begets gratitude just as love begets love. And it's this concept of what are you wanting to do and how do you fill your life with those things that then will reflect that. So if you're wanting gratitude, even when it's in the hard process, you need to be cultivating that gratitude. You need to be filling your life with other people that reflect that gratitude, other influences that reflect that gratitude. How are we shaping even our prayer and our desires to reflect what we want to be cultivating?
I really appreciated it when someone has been like, I think we need to set up boundaries. And like, hey, maybe we do need to unfollow each other. And even though those moments, I think they're hard and they hurt for maybe a couple days, you end up being thankful for it in the long run.
So often we think this is good forever, and that's not how life actually works.
What's up, wonderful people? My name's AJ Akpodiete, but you can call me AJ for short, and it's been too long since I last said those words. I have gotten a chance to be part of the creative processes for some different content creators and podcasts and churches and things, and it's been super fun. However, there really is nothing like stepping into that creative zone and fashioning something that's not meant to meet deadlines for a client, but is an outpouring of creative expression. And so I have returned. And I was wondering how I wanted to return for a long time. Thinking to myself, what kind of content do I want to be making? What do I want to be putting out there? I loved doing the Thoughtful Thursdays and Thinking Out Loud and the Passion Fruit Project and the streams that I was doing back in, 2017 up through 2020 and a little bit of 2021, but I want to do something different, and I've been trying to figure out what that means. At the same time, I've been having some amazing conversations with friends, mentors, and people that I really look up to, and I often catch myself asking, man, was there a way that someone, I wish that we could recreate that moment that we just had, or that someone else could hear the thing that person just said, because I think it can provide a lot of value to someone and maybe can lead to a lot of growth, because I've been growing, I've been learning a lot of things. And out of those two desires, the desire to create again and the desire to take these conversations I've been having with people and find a way to give them away to other people, I wanted to step into a new video series. I don't know what to call it. I don't know what it's necessarily going to be exactly like. I'm trying to refrain from calling it a podcast because everyone has a podcast. Everyone's mom has a podcast. Everyone's dad's uncle's friend from college's dog has a podcast. So for now, we're just saying up there, long form conversations chopped up into videos for YouTube and for Instagram. I want to make sure that I'm providing a way for you to consume them however you want to. So they are also available in podcast format on Spotify and possibly at some point on YouTube. Whoops, I just hit the mic. That's fun. And to help me launch into this new season of videos is my conversation with Sabrina Dawson. Sabrina, also known as Film Detours on Instagram, is an artist, photographer, and content creator, as well as devotional writer for a Christian publishing company known as Alabaster Co.
The situations God has tended to use me most in my life are situations where I didn't necessarily want to do it or just was trying different options.
Beyond that, she's a dear friend. She's full of wisdom, compassion, tenacity, and a deep desire for spiritual growth. It's been a pleasure getting to know her and have her in my life over the last year and a half.
And how often God uses at least my nose, and it sounds like your nose too, to say okay, you just said no, so let's actually say yes to this, and let's shift your affections towards what I want you to focus on rather than what maybe you have this lofty idea of focusing on.
And this conversation was one that we were invited into having for a sermon series at our young adults ministry called Minds, Attention, Heart's Affection. And the conversation ranges from many topics, from social media to what do we dwell on? How do we have boundaries with friendships? What does it mean to be people who are about honor and honesty? And it all revolves around this question of who do you follow? It's an hour and 20 minutes, and every single minute of it is good stuff. So without further ado and any more delays, this is my conversation with Sabrina Dawson, aka Film Detours. Who do you follow, they say?
That's a great question.
Okay, I have a thought, but it's not related to social media. Even though
That's
I know that's
fine.
the exact thing that we were brought in to talk about, but I was thinking about this earlier. I've kind of most of my life been a high school ministry kind of guy. Like my first foray into ministry was I was 15, leading like the Bible club at my high school. You know, I've just always been a high school ministry dude. Then my junior year of college, I really needed a job. And I remember thinking to myself, a little bit beforehand when I was starting to volunteer with Young Life, like I'll do high school ministry, I'll do college ministry, I'll never do middle school ministry. Imagine my surprise when one of the first places that I got hired at to teach dance was at a middle school through Boys and Girls Club. And, you know, it wasn't that I disliked middle schoolers, but I just didn't see myself having that aptitude or being immediately drawn towards that age group. But what I found was after like months of like showing up, you know, every day, being part of these kids' lives, trying to teach them things, etc. I woke up one day and I was like, whoa, I think I enjoy serving middle schoolers and whatnot, which I know sounds crazy, you know, to think about sometimes, or at least it did for me, you know, and it just made me realize we often think that we have to wait for us to feel a certain way before we do something, or like, I have to want to do that before I step into it. But the truth of the matter is the things that we give our time to are actually the things that we will end up having affection for, you know? Like it's not wait until you feel like it, it's do it first and then you'll feel like it later.
Yeah, I definitely think that the situations God has tended to use me most in my life are situations where I didn't necessarily want to do it or just was trying different options. And thinking about, I didn't necessarily have an affection for it when I started, and yet by the end of it, it was something that like I loved and cherished. And how often God uses at least my nose, and it sounds like your nose too, to say like, okay, you just said no, so let's actually say yes to this, and let's like shift your affections towards what I want you to focus on rather than what maybe you have this lofty idea of focusing on. Yeah, and I think same. My job is something that I never wanted to do. I had said no to like 5 times before graduating college. And yet I'm going into my 5th year, and this is something that I'm like, I can't imagine what my life would have been had I not pursued that and tried it out and said yes to some of those things too.
Yeah, definitely. I've you know, a little birdie told me that you, like, I don't know, I've heard that you have a pretty strong filter on like what you choose to follow and stuff online.
Yeah, I definitely do.
You know, I'm just curious, like how do you decide, like, oh yeah, I follow this person or I follow that person, or like you see this person, you're like, nope, you know, because I have my own thoughts behind it, but I want to hear yours first, because I feel like I kind of stumbled into the way that I choose who I follow and don't follow. But, you know, I have a feeling you're probably a bit more intentional about how you got to that point.
I don't know if it would say like that I was intentional or more if it was the way I was raised. I think I didn't grow up having a lot of like external media sources in my life, but my parents did ministry. And so it was always like, we're going to choose which people we let in closer.
No Harry Potter,
and
no
so,
Wizards
yeah,
of Waverly
no
Place,
Harry Potter,
you know.
no, not a lot of TV. So I grew up on things that were already like very altered, and I never felt like I was missing out on those things. But I am very thankful for a mom who still to this day, if I'm on the phone with her, will be like, who are you hanging out with? Because I don't like this attitude, or I do like this attitude. And so I still have people who like check me on my attitudes. And I really appreciate having those people who are honest with me, especially in my mom. But she would tell us we couldn't hang out with certain friends growing up because she's like, I don't like the attitudes that you are showing now. And I think for me, I very much took that into what am I influencing as a whole? So like what books am I reading? Like what things am I allowing on my social media? And there's even over the last couple of years, especially, like I can follow an account and it can be great for a season. And then I notice either the account starts to shift or my perception of the account starts to shift. And it's something that no longer is producing good fruit in my life. And so I think for me, it's also keeping in check what those things are seasonally. Because I think so often we think this is good forever, and that's not how life actually works. Nothing can be good in all seasons. And I think about how even in farming, we have to let the ground rest every 4 or 5 years. And how are we pulling things out when they're no longer producing good fruit or needing to have a rest in that? So that's kind of how I tend to filter things and asking like, oh, am I changing my attitude because of either people or things that I'm allowing into my life?
Yeah. So it's not like an arbitrary, like, you know, I follow this person because of this, or don't follow this person because of this, but it's like, what is that thing doing inside of me? That's how you're gonna choose.
Yeah, what nutrients am I gaining from that? So like, am I gaining good fruit? Am I gaining good nutrients for my own life and for the seasons I'm going through? And there's things that can be incredible for one season and totally detrimental in others. And I've noticed that a lot in the last year in my life of even books I've been reading recently. I'm like, this is not good for right now, or I actually need to focus more on some of the things this is talking about.
Yeah. I don't know, Kate, I don't know if this ever happens to you, but I remember when I was in high school, there was a time where, you know, I was trying to keep up with a lot of like new video game stuff that was coming out. This was like around the time that like the Xbox One and I think the PlayStation 4. They all get mixed up in my mind sometimes, but it was around the time that they were coming out. And so I was trying to be like on top of my game in terms of like all the different updates and stuff. And so there was this one YouTuber that I enjoyed watching. And as I watched his stuff, I was learning all these cool things, and he had cool like hot takes and spicy perspectives and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel edgy and cool, and I feel like I'm on the inside. But he also, you know, he had like some crude jokes here and there, you know, and he said some stuff that was like not the most like Christian filter, so to speak, on the way that he spoke. And it wasn't even necessarily that I started talking like that guy, but in my mind, people would say things and I would respond in my mind the way that guy would respond. Like I would think thoughts that were similar to the things that I was hearing him say and like phrases he would use in his YouTube videos. And one day I realized like, whoa, why did I think that just now? Or like, why am I feeling this way about this thing? And it's not that I wanted to think those things, not that I wanted to feel a certain way. Because sometimes like, we tell people, oh, just stop feeling like X, Y, or Z, but that's not always super feasible for someone to do. You can't just be like, stop feeling that way, you know? But what we can say and what we can note is that sometimes the things that we're consuming are leading us to feel that way. You know, like I understand why people say things like, oh, you know, choose joy. I understand it, but I sometimes have a problem with saying just choose joy and not elaborating on what that means. About a week or so ago, I was given a devotional at work and talking about Philippians chapter 4 and how Paul says, be anxious for nothing. And we hear stuff like that and we're like, oh, be anxious for nothing. Like, why did you have anxiety? Come on now. But we have to let that play out. It's like, be anxious for nothing, but pray about everything. And I think the Message version says, shape your worries into prayer. Mm-hmm. And then it goes on from there and it says like, bring it to God with thanksgiving. Okay, I got a battle plan now. I'm worried about something, let me give thanks to God about something related to that thing. And then it says, and supplication, make your request known to the Lord. Okay, let me, make my request known to God about that thing, okay? Plan is continuing. We've got some more steps in here. Then he says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is good, think about these things. It's like, oh, okay. So So now I need to, active moment, give thanks, make your request known to the Lord. But now passively, we have to cultivate a mind space that has, us thinking about what's good, what's right, what's noble, what's true. And, it may sound kind of cringy and kind of like, that's weird, AJ, but maybe like it's really helpful to follow Christian YouTubers and Christian Instagram accounts and Christian TikTokers, and just like I've noticed filling up my timeline with more like of the word and with more scripture and people like, giving like healthy, solid perspective on like what God's word has to say and on life and stuff. That is so much more helpful to me than, even like, like I make music and stuff, like having more music stuff on my timeline. Now, I do want to have more music stuff on my timeline, but the idea is, like what you're saying, like, what are these things doing to me? If you want to grow in music, spend more time around musicians and fill your content and your timeline with music stuff. If you want to grow in godliness, fill your timeline with the word of God, but that was a really long way of saying, I agree exactly with what you're saying, and that your parents were like, who are you hanging out with? Or, don't watch that show, or don't input that thing, because those inputs, they do something to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't understand the amount of even little things can be inputs in your life. I think one of my favorite quotes, like talking about like, what are you putting in gratitude and things like that, and what you were just saying, one of my favorite life quotes is by Henry Nouwen, and it's from Life of the Beloved, which is a great book as it is. But in it, he says, gratitude begets gratitude just as love begets love. And it's this concept of what are you wanting to do, and how do you fill your life with those things that then will reflect that. So if you're wanting gratitude, even when it's in the hard process, you need to be cultivating that gratitude. You need to be filling your life with other people that reflect that gratitude, other influences that reflect that gratitude. And I think that goes to like what you were saying as well of how are we shaping even our prayer and our desires to reflect what we want to be cultivating. And I think that's a great point.
Yeah, but how do you do that when, let's say you have a friend who, maybe, some people say that they're toxic or they're ungrateful or they have a bad attitude, but you've been friends for maybe like 6, 8, 10 years. Like you've known this person since middle school and now you're in your 20s, like that's kind of a hard, like, it sounds like you're saying, don't be friends with that person who's ungrateful or who, I know that that might not be what you said expressly, but someone might hear that and be like, what, you mean I can't have like my homies, my slimes, my day ones? Like, what do you, I don't know. Like, is that? I
think that's something actually that God has been teaching me a lot this year of how much capacity are you giving those people when they're not being healthy in that season of life? And I think like I actually just had a really hard situation with 2 different friends, one that's more recent, that was a church friend that we just were both going through some really heavy things this last year, and recognized that together they compounded and created a really healthy environment for both of us. And we didn't talk about it. We didn't say anything about it. We just kind of distanced. And we came back together after maybe 6 months and said, look, we're both sorry, but like we needed that. And I think sometimes we feel like we don't have the capability to say, hey, we need to cut people out for a certain season or limit for a certain season. And yet I have another friend that we did acknowledge that, and we were friends in college, we were roommates in college, and it was a 3-year stretch where we barely talked. And now we're coming back to saying, okay, let's do life together again because we're in a healthier season to do that. And I think sometimes it's saying, maybe let's not do every day together. Maybe you're not one of my 12, but you're still in my outer circle. And yet, like, I think Christ set up such a cool environment of like, who are your 12? Who are your 3? And then who are your like wider circle? Because we can have a lot of people that we either follow or have following us. And yet, like, we need to be intentional about who our 12 are and who our 3 are. And I think that's a great model of sometimes those 12 can switch in and out in healthier seasons, but that doesn't mean they're not still part of the greater circle.
So this is the part where you say, and here at Calvary, we have small groups.
Yes, I think that is hard though too. And sometimes you're like, oh man, like the individual I was talking about was in my small group, and it was something that as a leader I had to say, is this the right space for both of us or
so
not?
So Jordan, if you're listening, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So that said, I think there are circumstances, but I think being clear and communicating those things of, hey, this just seems hard right now. Can we either figure out a healthier way for both of us, or can we take a little bit more space away so that I can be healthy, you can be healthy, and make this a healthier relationship?
Yeah, that's a conversation that I think requires some pretty intense maturity.
And wisdom. I don't think it's a conversation you enter into without prayer, but and counsel, I think, even too. But I think it's definitely something that...
Yeah, because, I had a friend a while back who, and, granted, like I was... like when you're, young and we're all young, sorry. But when you're still figuring out like adulthood and stuff, and then, relationships, get thrown into the mix, there's debates, right, about like, do you unfollow your ex? Do you block someone? Like if a relationship didn't work out? What if you were never dating, but you were just like, talking or whatever? Like, what do you do when you see this person on social media and stuff? And there was a season where I was in a place with someone from back in college where like we were part of the same friend group and there were feelings involved and stuff. And I knew that for myself, every time I opened Instagram, because Instagram, it knows. It knows.
It always knows.
It pushes that person's stories to the front. They're like, you want to know what they're up to. And I just knew that for a season, like I needed to unfollow that person, and it wasn't that like I didn't value that person's friendship. It wasn't that there was something wrong with her or anything like that. And again, we have the same group of friends still. And like one day, after we ended up making up and things were better, and I felt like our friendship got to a much healthier place. I remember we were planning like a worship retreat thing for one of our classes, and she was like, she mentioned something and I mentioned something. She's like, yeah, you would know if you still followed me. You unfollowed me like a couple months ago, and I was like, ooh, that's tough. But it was like, I could tell that she like was upset that I unfollowed her, but I didn't know how to have a conversation with that person. And like there have been times after that where like I really appreciated it when someone has been like, hey, like I think we need to set up boundaries, because of this situation or that one. Like, hey, maybe we do need to unfollow each other. And even though those moments, I think they're hard and they hurt for maybe a couple days, you end up being thankful for it in the long run. Whereas sometimes when you don't have that conversation, you end up carrying around hurt for like months on end. I would rather, somewhere in Proverbs it says like, like better are the wounds of a friend than the kisses of an enemy or something like that. Like I'd rather have my friend hurt me today for my long-term benefit than for me to just, secretly be hurt by them for months, and then I'm just holding in this animosity, just for forever. And then you start acting in weird ways and then you start getting all toxic and stuff. And you're like, I would never do such a thing. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I think that? And it's like, oh, well, you played yourself, AJ and Sabrina tried to tell you.
Yeah, I think to that too, I think something that I learned during that season of some of those harder relationships was I was reading a book completely unrelated about what it means to do life at a table with other people. Mm-hmm. And in the book, like this. And in the book, the author talks about how a dull knife hurts more than a sharp knife. And that's where ironing, sharpening iron comes in, is that if you try to cut something with a dull knife, it's only going to cause more pain, and the wound is only going to be worse. And so sometimes that hard conversation and sharpening that knife and just saying like, I'm going to have a clear conversation here, and cut it to the quick, because that's going to be in the long run, instead of months of pain and suffering and not really knowing even what the other person's thinking. I think sometimes it makes it so that you're focusing more on, okay, what can we do in the now? And let's rehash this conversation when one of us is in a healthier position as well. I think setting aside time to have some of those conversations of, this may just be for a month, or this may just be for this week. I just need to get through this week. And saying like, it's not forever. It's just, I need some of that distance to unfollow and unsubscribe to what you're going through. Can sometimes be healthier in the long run and not cause as many hard problems later down the road.
Totally. Gaby, have you ever heard of this idea of like, I think it's called trauma fatigue?
Yeah.
Where like, once upon a time, before we lived in, cities and towns and stuff, and we lived in villages, we probably knew 150 people, like YA alone has like 400, and it's like, but back then, the people who you knew that village, maybe even less than 150, probably like 100, that you knew these people, you did life with them every day. Oh man, George's Aunt Sally is sick. Your Aunt Sally is sick. And so I'm like, oh man, like I'm feeling for you, I'm trying to, empathize what you're going through, try to be there for you and stuff. Now we know when everyone's Aunt Sally is sick. Every time that anyone's going through something, we're automatically receiving the input and the stimulus, like something crazy or outrageous happens and we're like, not only am I mad, but now you're mad, Brian's mad, Sarah's mad. I'm seeing out why everyone's mad on social media. Now, all that anger, like sometimes we think, oh, I'm just venting. I'm just getting it all out there. But as we get it all out there, we also need to understand that other people, when we're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever, we're getting it all in here. And we're taking on everyone's trauma and everyone's rage. And we're thinking like, I'll pray for that. It's like, if you prayed for every single, I don't want to say prayer worthy, but like everything that you see on Instagram that you should possibly be praying for, you would, hey, again, the algorithm, they know, they'll just keep firing away the stuff that you're stopped on and being like, Lord, I pray for this person, and all this stuff. And then suddenly it's been 3 hours and you're like, why do I feel so terrible right now? It's because you've been taking on a much greater amount of trauma than human beings were ever meant to really hold in one person,
Yeah. And I think that that also takes discernment on our part of what are we going to share with who? Because I think so often we grew up, especially as young adults in this season, we grew up in a space where social media was new to us. We were kind of the first generation to be raised with this. And so sometimes I think it still takes discernment on what do we share and what do we not? And how are we going to discern that, and who are we going to share with? And I think sometimes for the sake of everyone, I actually was talking about this with my sister this morning of she shut down her social media for the point of she didn't want to be the person that caused other people to be envious. And so she's someone who travels greatly and does incredible things. And yet she was like, I recognized that I was causing the person sitting alone in their room to be suffering because my travel blog for my aesthetic and beauty was not something that was being beneficial to anyone other than me. And I think I really have been challenged by the concept of Mary in the last couple of years of she treasured things and pondered them, and she didn't always share everything. And she had this amazing story that she could tell, and she went through some pretty heavy trauma, some pretty heavy things, and yet she didn't share with everyone. And there were certain things she kept back and certain things she chose to share. And I think that's something that takes a lot of discernment that I think as a culture we still need to grow on, of not everything needs to be shared to the highest extent. And yet there are some things that we need to share at a more public level. And how do you discern those things? And how do you pray over what parts of your story is God going to use today? Because I don't think it's that they won't get used at some point, but it could get used tomorrow or it could get used at the end of your life. You don't know. I think that's one of those things that we don't always have discernment on what we release to our followers either. And I think it does cause this communal aspect of overload. Because we're not focusing on our village, our tribe.
Yeah. So then how would I know? Like, let's say, obviously there's a spectrum, right? Failing a test, versus, grandma passes away. Like, how do I know, like, what to share with people?
That's something I think I'm still learning. I don't think I'm perfect at it, but I think there's aspects of my story that I have watched God use in some pretty incredible ways that I would not have wanted him to use. And yet there's other aspects that I'm like, is this something I should share or not? And in not sharing that, I've had incredible conversations with individuals, but it's not something that is public knowledge about me. And I think it really does take discernment and leaning into what God is trying to share through your life, rather than leaning onto what we want to share.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think if you play the social media game for long enough, I don't know if you'd use this word to consider, like, to categorize yourself, but like, a creative, or a content creator or whatever, you do eventually notice, like, okay, there's certain things that I can do that are going to get more likes or more views or more comments or more shares. And sometimes, like, this is another term I heard in the last couple of years. I don't know, I think we can say this, but like trauma porn, that like sometimes we've ingested so much trauma that we actually are looking for more. And we know that posting the most traumatic things or posting the most devastating things are the most, things that bring about that, like, deep, I don't want to say cathartic, because cathartic's kind of a helpful thing, but like those really deep things, we know that people are gonna, shower those with those double taps, you know what I'm saying? And I think, it can be hard to not just always go for that, but to also be intentional about, like, okay, what's actually beneficial to the people that follow me? And like, it's especially like if you do social media like as a job, or if you like manage someone else's social media, and this might not even necessarily be relatable to anyone who's watching this video or whatever, but like there's like times when, like, I know that at my job where I do social media videos, like, I know that I could right now pull a clip from an episode where they're talking about Roe v. Wade, or where they're talking about, a transgender swimmer, where they're talking about whatever. I can post that to TikTok or to Instagram or to like a second channel or something, and it'll go bananas. I know that it'll get tons of views, tons of comments, etc. But knowing the calling on my life is not necessarily to get the most views or the most comments. And then I think that's true for the person working in social media, but it's also true for the person trying to figure out, do I post shirtless selfies on Instagram? Do I post my workout routine? And there's a question of, for some people, that's really helpful and that's really good, because that's your thing, like, you're a fitness kind of person. But then also thinking, like, what's the most helpful, not just what's going to be the most productive. And sorry, I'm going on this long tangent, but, like, I've had friends who, like, I love and think are, like, amazing and stuff, but, like, in certain seasons where, like, I was trying to, like, grow in godliness and draw closer to the Lord, I knew that when I would see their posts, it would, like, activate something inside of me. in like a, like lust kind of sense. And I just realized like, well, what does scripture say? If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And it's not to say you gouge out or cut out that person, but like I knew like, I might have needed to unfollow. But now I discovered the power of the mute button,
Muting people is actually a really healthy thing sometimes.
Because you can still talk to people over DMs.
Right.
If you mute them, you just won't see their posts and their stories anymore.
Right.
And that's been really good for me to just be like, okay, I know that I need to control my inputs, but then also like when it comes to what I'm posting, how can I be wise about my outputs, knowing that there's someone else who like, they might not necessarily be like, struggling with lust, or whether it's, trying to figure out their sexuality, or trying to come to terms with certain things going on in politics, or, just outrage because there's death in their family. Like people are going through all kinds of different things, and just knowing that's true. Okay, what's the most helpful for the people I follow? And some people are going to disagree, but I can't base my obedience off of the outcome. I base my obedience off of scripture, off of getting close to the Lord and taking in input from people who are like wiser and further along than me, like you, like I'd say like you're a person who like, I would say is like very wise. And like I value the things that you have to say. Taking that and letting that inform my decision-making, not, someone commented and said, I don't like that you posted this because of meh. It's like, well, that person knows where the mute button is, Like we all have choices here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I just threw like.
No, I'm thinking through it.
That was just the words that just come out sometimes.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you were saying is like, yes, following the wise people and not just the wise people, the people who will be honest with you. I think something I have really been discussing a lot with my small group is the difference between truth and honesty. And the root of honesty comes from the same root as honor. Okay. And so, whereas you can tell someone the truth, what is the difference between telling them with honor? Ooh. And how do we...
That's it. It's over. Pass the offering plate now.
But I think it's true. It's like seeking the people who are honest with you, not just truthful with you, but honest with you, and saying like, I'm noticing this. Why is it happening? How can we change it? Or how can we cultivate this to be a better thing? And I think I think we so value wisdom, and we can get wisdom from so many sources, but honesty can only come with people who know you. And I think that's one of those things where I think we can have a lot of things influencing us, but who are the people we surround ourselves with? Who are the people that when the crisis happens, who's the first people you call? Who are the people on your favorite list? And I think for me, I went through a really traumatic season where I literally had to say, who are going to be my first calls? And I needed help. It wasn't something that I could do alone anymore. And it wasn't something that was anything based on my actions. But there was seasons in my life that followed where it was like, I need to ask this person for help because I know they're going to be honest with me. And it's not that they're my friend I talk to every day or the person I follow on social media, but I know this person will be honest with me and I know they have wisdom and discernment. And I think that's something that, the mute button's really great for those people who are just truthful and not honest, right? And I think that's something sometimes we have to discern of what words are coming out of their mouth. Like, don't let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth. And like, if it's not building you up and if it's not giving you tangible things to progress forward, because I think sometimes we want to wallow in that trauma, and we need the friends who are honest and say, okay, great, we spent a moment here, we're healing here, but we can't let the wound fester. We got to clean it. We got to move forward. And I think sometimes it's those people that are really important in my life and have been important in my life, but are people that I would much rather follow them on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis or a month-to-month basis than someone across the country that I won't have contact with more than 5 times a year. Yeah. And I think that's just where I've recognized and had some really sweet conversations with my small group because we chose to be honest with each other. We chose to set that foundation of we're not gonna come into this group and not be honest and honoring each other. And if you aren't, if you just want to speak truth or non-truth and heresy is like what you're leading your life on, then like, let's have a conversation about that. But also that's not the culture we want to cultivate here.
So you're saying even if I tell lies, as long as I'm being honoring, that's the...
No, because there's not truth in that.
No
so
truth.
That's where the honesty comes in too, is that it's truth and honor that creates honesty in a lot of ways.
Wow, truth and honor. I've never heard that before. That's...
I think my small group.
Wow. Someone might hear some of the stuff we're saying and be like, oh man, Sabrina and AJ, they're just they're full of it. They're just these holy rollers who are trying to take away everyone's fun. Like, come on, why are you trying to put so many rules on my social media usage? Like, I'm just trying to, just do some, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I myself, I can have a tendency to come off like, hey, look, I've got all the answers to solve all your problems, so you better do exactly what I'm telling you to do or else things are gonna go bad, And I try to not do that as much as I can, but like, I don't know, like, do you think some of this stuff might feel like what's the difference between what we're saying and, just legalism? Like the person who says like, you better not, watch Pokemon or play video games, or you better not read Harry Potter or else you might, open portals to, witchcraft, or, like, what's the difference?
I had a mentor in college tell me one time that she wasn't going to let me know what wisdom she had until I asked. And that was really life-changing for me in the sense of I try not to give wisdom or opinions on things unless I'm asked directly. And so she called it, we were doing student life, we were welcoming new freshmen in. And as someone older and wiser who had gone through their freshman year, who had done all these things, who had, spent time in the city we were living, and she said, you should never should someone. You should never say, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. I had this amazing thing and you should do it too, because everyone's coming from different experiences and different backgrounds, has different strengths and weaknesses. And I think she would always say, this is my story and this is what came out of it. Do with it what you will. And if that's where, hey, you actually really like the fruit that came out of that, do it. But I'm not going to tell you should or shouldn't do it. Right. And I think that's something that one thing can be really beneficial to me. It can be super detrimental to someone else. Cutting social media for me could be hard and not good. And I would lose valuable friendships, valuable influences in my life. And yet for someone else, that's what they need to do. Yeah. And I think we have to acknowledge that it's one of those things where if you and someone else are praying over something equally, that if you're trying to make a decision between the two of you, or you're trying to find advice or wisdom between the two of you, if you're both being fervent and praying about it, I don't think it's one of those things where God is going to lead you in exact opposite directions in the sense of, like, he's not going to tell you guys polarize things if you're both praying over it for the same reason. And I think that at the end of the day, like, God will make his plan and agenda clear. And for different people, that can mean entirely different things. And I think we have this lofty idea of he's not going to speak to us in that. And yet there's power in communal prayer. There's power in seeking advice, seeking wisdom. And I think there's power in knowing that he's going to tell us what he has in mind for things, even if they're our smallest woes. I mean, he clothes the lilies. Like, what more is he doing for us? And I think we kind of have this lofty idea that we're always going to have these, like, life-changing experiences. Most of the time, like, your small day-to-day actions can be reversed. Like, if you do it wrong, you can go back and say, I did it wrong. That was a learning curve. Like, I learned the wrong way. Let's go back and restart. I think most of the time we don't feel like we can restart things, and yet a lot of things in life we actually can. And we have the power to try things.
Yeah. And this is just the way that our stories have happened to play out.
Yeah. And your story is very different than my story. And I think that's been what's cool about our friendship, is that we get to come at things from a very different perspective. And yet a lot of what we do in ministry is similar. And yet what's worked for you won't work for me. And I know that, and like vice versa. And yet we can find wisdom from each other in situations where one of us has had more answers than the other. And say like, yes, no, maybe, I don't know, we'll see what works, you know? And I think that's what's cool about community and being a part of, especially like a young adult community, is that you have people in a similar life stage that have different experiences and different perspectives that you can gain that wisdom from as well.
Yeah, and the hope, is that, this is something that like in the, I don't know if you want to call it like the leadership space or whatever, but like a concept in leadership is this idea of when you're looking for people who you want to step into positions and stuff, you're looking for people who are, they used to say fat C's, but I think people are changing it to say fact instead of fat C because, anyway, fact. So faithful, available, courageous, and teachable. Like faithful is like, do you show up? Like, are you here? Available, do you have the time? Do you have like 5,000 different commitments? Then maybe you're not ready for this position. C, courageous, like, are you willing to step out, and do hard things? And then the T is teachable, like, are you willing to learn new things? And I think that's a good habit, not just for people who want to be leaders, but I think just for being an adult, I think for just living life. I think if someone shows up to YA on a Thursday night, you will get infinitely more out of your time if you're willing to say, I don't know everything. I might not agree with everything that Sabrina says or everything that AJ says or everything that my small group leader says. I don't even agree with everything that, Sarah and the Bryans say, but I'm willing to seek to understand. I'm willing to try another way. Because, hey, there's a way in a man's heart that he thinks leads to life, but ultimately leads to destruction. Human beings plan out their lives, but the Lord directs their steps, So then we take that even into small groups. You get more out of a small group if you're willing to learn. And then just take that into your friendships and into the way you interact with social media. Like, be willing to learn. Like, someone else probably has some more good ideas.
Yeah. Or at least ideas that can help you along the way.
Indeed.
Yeah. You said something, though, that made me think about another question of thinking about new things and processing new things. But I would love to hear how you kind of make a discernment between new influences in your life and new things you're going to follow, whether that's a trend or a new person that comes into your life. How do you discern what is good and what isn't for new situations? Because I feel like you are someone who has a lot of new influences coming into your life on a regular basis.
Because TikTok.
Okay, sure, TikTok.
Okay, I feel like I need to sneeze. Sorry.
Because I think we're in a society that we're constantly bombarded with the new, the updated, the things that are exciting and I guess just new as a whole. New's a great word. So how do you discern like which of those you keep and what old things you cling to?
Yeah. I think I actually think I could do a better job of not letting in so many new influences because I'm pretty quick to, like follow or add or friend people sometimes. And then it's usually like, oh, didn't want to see that on my timeline. And then that's when we control Z, that whole situation. But I I think something that I think is helpful is like, it almost sounds ethereal, so like I don't necessarily want to say it, but I think it's true that I think the Holy Spirit sometimes like will direct you and kind of like move your heart away from certain things, or like cause you to start to dislike certain like kinds of content or certain kinds of posts and stuff, or like cause, sometimes like I'll pray this prayer and say like, God, I pray that just cause my heart to fall into alignment with your heart, that my heart will beat for your heart beats for, break for your heart breaks for. And it's a dangerous prayer because you're going to start feeling your heart break for a lot of things. A lot of things that you used to once love and enjoy. But I think even the Apostle Paul, I think it was Paul, he said like, the things that I once hated, I now love. The things I once loved, I now hate. If that was incorrect, I'm sure Brian, who's behind the camera, will tell us if it's, if I just act. That was
if our heresy meter goes like this.
Yeah. That was Obadiah, actually. Always comes back to Obadiah. But I think there's the questions of like why, it's pretty case by case. Like on Instagram, sometimes I'll see someone and I'll be like, I know this person, follow. But other times, if I'm in like a healthy, solid headspace and I see someone, I'm like, oh, I know this person, or even like this person followed me. And it says, instead of follow, it says follow back, because it wants you to really feel the fact they followed you. And now you feel bad if you don't hit it. But I sometimes think to myself like, oh, but do I need to? Like, is it adding, so to speak, value to my like social media consumption stuff? And it's like, oh, this is just like an acquaintance from Kowloon that like I kind of know, not really sure. I don't need to follow them. And I hope that person's not offended that I didn't follow them, because, nobody owes you a follow necessarily. But also, we had to just take a pause because I wanted to find this verse. But Matthew 6, verses 21 and 22, say like, where your heart is, there your treasures will be. Nope, that's not what it says. My version says, your heart will be where your riches are. The eye is like a lamp for the body. Suppose your eyes are healthy, then your whole body will be full of light. And I think just like acknowledging that whatever our eyes are seeing, that stuff, it goes inward and it starts to shape what our heart is like. It starts to shape where we place our riches, whether that's in heaven, whether it's on earth, whether it's in the way that you look, whether it's the way that you're perceived, et cetera, et cetera. But then, Jesus later says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So like just knowing that the things that I'm consuming on Instagram are eventually going to be the things that I'm putting out there into the world. I know that's not necessarily like a great answer for your question, because like, again, I feel like I follow people too much, and I should actually have like a better barometer of saying like, actually, some people talk about the 24-hour rule or the 72-hour rule. Something crazy happens in the world that outrages you, don't post about it for 24 hours or 72 hours to make sure that you're not just posting out of rage. Also, when you say like about like followers or notifications and stuff, hey, set a limit and say, I'm not going to respond to any notifications until after work, or not going to respond to any notifications except once a day or once every couple days. Okay, a couple days is kind of far, but
depending on your social media use.
Sorry, that's true. That's true. Some people, haven't opened Instagram in like years. And so anyway, social media is a tool. It's not like it's like a healthy or an unhealthy. It's just a matter of what are you gonna use it for. Yeah. But yeah, and I think if there's something that I think adds to like in a biblical sense, me getting like another slant or another side of how people are communicating scripture, I usually will want to follow that because that's helpful. If I can see something that like career-wise I think would be beneficial for me to follow this account, I'll follow that account. If I see, like, I usually try to, follow people like in my small group, people who I am meeting. On the practical side, it's what's going to be helpful for either like biblical knowledge, career stuff, friends, you know, like what's gonna help me do better in ministry, what's gonna help me improve, I guess. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think, so the verse you just talked about in thinking about what we allow come through and rest in our hearts. I was reminded of a conversation we actually had in church lobby a couple weeks ago. It was this really cool moment of I had been feeling like I needed more just grounding of wisdom in my life. And so something I have done in the past that I think comes out of a practice of studying Lectio Divina in college, but comes out of this practice of really just dwelling with certain scriptures, is a few weeks before I had started reading through Proverbs and just spending 1 week on one proverb. And each morning, not each morning, because I'm not always super consistent, I'll be honest, but at least a few times a week reading out of a different translation and seeing what different things did. And it's a practice I've done in other seasons of my life. But you had said to me that you were like, wow, Sabrina, you're just such a wise person and all these other things. And I was like, I just pulled that out of Proverbs. I can tell you what Proverbs is in right now. I think I was in 12 that week. And I had actually just quoted you something from the Proverbs. And you're like, wow, that's wise. And I was like, Proverbs, like, go read it. But I think that's something too of like, when you do dwell on something, people around you, friends, notice it. And I think it was a really practical example in our friendship of, I had been doing something because I knew I needed it, and then you recognized it. And it was this cool opportunity for me to say, thank you for noticing, because that was actually something intentional I had been doing. And I think what we do dwell with and rest with, like rest in our heart, and comes back out in other ways, for good or bad, but hopefully we're letting those good influences in.
No, praise God, man.
Yeah.
So I guess then, you know, the logical question out of that is like, okay, besides reading the book of Proverbs every day, like, okay, what do we dwell on?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we mentioned a lot, who don't we follow?
Yeah.
Or like why we don't follow, like who do we filter out? But like okay, now like what do we dwell on? Who do we follow? What is helpful? What is good? You know, and maybe instead of being like, I have a tendency sometimes to get like super ethereal and like up there, which is why the ideas sometimes sound like, or look like, you know, like the gas molecule images in 7th grade.
They're bouncing around
they're
all
just
over the place.
all over the place. It's because I'm up there, but I think maybe, you know, we could like bring it down to like super simple, super base level, like
Love that.
what's practical and helpful for people listening.
I think one thing that has really been practical for me, I'm an avid reader, and I think there's other ways of doing this as well, whether that's you're someone who enjoys the audio aspect of life and listening to things more, or visual aspects and going back to those things. But for me as a reader, one thing that I found be super, super helpful on influences in my life and things that I follow is what has stood the test of time. So rather than picking up the next greatest book on, you know, Enneagram or this theologian or this pastor or this person who's doing ministry, saying, okay, that's the great new trend. That's awesome. I love that everyone's reading it. I love that we can have conversation about it. But for me, actually stepping back and saying, what have people been talking about for the last 100 years? What have people been talking about for the last 1,000 years? I think as Christians, we have a huge library of people that are incredible influences who have stood the test of time, who have been influential time and time and time again. And I think sometimes rather than focusing on what's new, stepping back and saying, that new person's awesome, but what are their influences? Who are the people that brought them to that point? And then just kind of going down the chain. So for me, that looks like Henry Nouwen was someone that my college pastor was super involved in. We also had, you know, really great things at our college, like Dallas Willard and Dallas Willard Center. And so there was different aspects of our lives that we we're encouraged to go back further. When I was studying abroad, we lived in a convent and that was built in the 12th century. And so many people had gone through that space. And so we actually tried to reflect on what are some of the things that they would have read. So going back to the Desert Fathers, going back to different influences and saying, this is something that has influenced the other people that have walked this journey. And how can I then take what they've said and what they've dwelled on in scripture and followed different resources, which sounds very much like an academic, and I'll admit that. But looking at the footnotes and saying, okay, so this person's influenced by Thomas Aquinas. This person's influenced by Julian of Norwich. Yeah. Where do we go then to look at some of those people and say, hey, this was influential to someone that is saying good things for the present. So what can I reflect on from that person in the past?
I see. So I need to go and follow Dietrich Bonhoeffer on Instagram.
Yes. and the sad thing is so often those people aren't the ones on social media because they're so long dead. And yet I even notice when, and this is going to be totally like a literary nerd thing, but I notice when those influences are in the people that I have started following. And so when you go back to some of those people who have been critical to the faith throughout the last 2,000 years or longer, then you can say, look, there's a pattern. There's history in this. And it stood through the test of time. Most things that have lasted 100 years are probably not going to be heretical. And so there's aspects of that it's already been refined by others. I don't need to think about this as much as something that's good or bad if, 20 other people that I know have been influenced by that person in incredible ways. And so I think more often than not, I ask people when they come and sit with me or mentor me, what's something that was the most influential book in your life? Because everyone has one. And more often than not, they're not the book published in the last 20 years. They're books that have been published further and further back. And the older the generation, the further back the book goes, is what I've noticed. I think sometimes not focusing on the new all the time, but actually looking back at history has been something that I've really valued, that's really been installed in me throughout different wise people in my life.
Wow, I've never thought about that before. It almost sounds like counterintuitive to think, oh, like, how do I know who to follow on social media or like what influencers or whatnot? Well, hey, go and reflect on some ancient truths and stuff. And then as you go and you like be shaped by that and then compare that to like the patterns of the people that you're seeing on social media and then follow those people. Yeah. And it's like, oh, it's almost like, but it makes so much sense. Like at first I was like, she's not talking about social media. It's like, Sabrina, stick to the script. But you're right, and that, this is all pretty new. Like even, I think, is Instagram even 10 years old? I mean, it's probably a little bit more than 10 years old.
It's a little bit more because I was in high school. Wow, I sound old when I say it. I was in high school when Instagram came out. Yeah, so definitely a little over a decade now. Yeah. But I think that's something that also has been fascinating to me. I was having a conversation with some friends this week about, and I'm blanking out what friends it was, so I'm sorry if it was you. But we were having a conversation about how YouTube's the only beneficial mental health-wise of the social media platforms. And why is it that YouTube is the only one that statistically has become beneficial for our mental health? Everything else has shown statistics that it's not beneficial. And so we were talking about why is it that is the one beneficial platform? And it's because it's an educational thing. It's turned so much into, this is a longer format, this is educational, this isn't me and what I'm going through and self-centered and reflecting on yourself and your followers. It's something more of, this is a place to learn. And I think YouTube has been the one place that has kind of set that up. And I think it goes back to the same facts of, we can learn things. I mean, when I have a car problem, I don't go directly to the mechanic, I go to YouTube and say, how can I do this on my own? What can I learn to fix this small problem? Or what can I educate myself to before I go to other sources?
Yeah, man, that's so interesting. Because, like I've heard people, make comparisons to like, for those who, maybe feel like social media is always just this objectively bad thing that's, rotting our brains and causing us all to be anxious and depressed. Like I've heard some people give helpful references to like a lot of social medias are just new forms of things that we had in analog. So like Instagram, which we've talked about a lot, is a lot like the family photo album growing up. In a family photo album, like people criticize Instagram and say, you're only posting the highlights, you're only posting the best photos. It's like, well, we've always had things like that, but you only went and looked through like the family photo album, like, well, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe like, oh, you've got some guests over. Hey, here's some stuff from,
you brought someone home to the family. And
yeah,
you go through it. Yeah.
And Facebook's even similar to that as well. And then LinkedIn, think of as like, oh, that's something like the resume or like your portfolio or your website or whatever. And then YouTube, it's kind of more like a library. Like you can go to the library every day and it's not going to, it sounds ridiculous to say, but like, it's not going to deter your mental health to go to the library every day. It'll probably actually be really good for you. Right. But if you look at someone else's family photo album every day, like just know that those are curated, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah. It's not a bad thing once you understand that and you realize like, oh, like the pressure's kind of off. Because then I realized, hey, why don't I could be intentional about putting some less than perfect photos in my family photo album. Or even TikTok, it's kind of like, the home videos that we used to make where you're being silly, probably saying something a little wild that you wouldn't want anyone to see, but you still post it on TikTok anyway because, we think, oh, no one's gonna see, it's just a TikTok, that, and those things, none of the analog versions of these things were bad. It's just that we have to acknowledge we've changed how we use them on a macro scale. So what if we got a little creative and said, okay, whether we like it or not, social media is here to stay, So let's think of how we can leverage those things for the kingdom. Maybe consider like going back to the fitness example. Like maybe the most helpful thing for someone to post might actually be like their progress, each month, of like where they're at with their, fitness journey. And maybe it's even adding in, hey, like what did I eat today? And posting that. Because, sometimes people say, the gram has to eat before we do, or adding in like conversations about sleep. And maybe it's that you just post a selfie and the caption is where you just put some really rich content and you even add like some scripture in there. Maybe you don't even have a Christian audience, but like a lot of people could benefit from seeing scripture. Maybe you don't add scripture because that's not what's gonna be beneficial. But just thinking like, how do I take these things that are not bad things, but that are often used for bad, and tailor them a little bit. Like when God created Adam and Eve, he said, go out and subdue all the earth. Let me think, subdue, like, you put someone in a headlock, you subdue them. Like he said, you have dominion. When you have a domain, that means that you have control over that space. Do something with it. Yeah. Create something beautiful. It's not all bad, it's not doom and gloom. You don't have to doom scroll. You don't have to, go through trauma fatigue. There's better ways that we could live in the social media world. Yeah,
I think as you're saying that, one example that I have had from multiple friends actually over the last 2 years of really being in pandemic, and kind of coming out of that as well, is I've had a couple friends on their stories post questions that are pretty ambiguous questions, but are questions that really just took. And so one of the questions that someone I knew from college, someone that honestly I don't probably need to be following anymore, but I've actually kept following because of some of his story content, he posted a question of what are you proud of in the last year? And he literally reposted everyone's pride points, and in a healthy way of like, these are things that I've done well. And he commented back on people that he hadn't talked to in 5, 10, 15 years and said, wow, this is incredible because I knew you then. And this is where you are now. And highlighting and affirming not only what they're proud of, but saying like, hey, this is so cool that, you're the girl I had a crush on in middle school and now you're, in the National Ballet. Like, that's incredible. And it's things like that, yeah, we can be like encouraging people and use our words in really good ways by simply asking a question. I think of another friend who is just one of the sweetest women I know and actually has shaped a project I'm doing this year. And
exclusive.
And exclusive content, not available yet. But she did this thing last year where she would write 3 things she was grateful for every day. And that's a normal practice for a lot of people. And yet she once a month would post the highlights of those 3 things a day. And she would just post it on her story. And it became something that every month I started looking forward to last year of what is Elise excited for. And I was just so blown away by knowing certain aspects of her and seeing her post different things about like, I'm really just thankful for the color orange on leaves. And I'm like, that is so obscure. But it was these small things that she would post a dozen of. And I would look forward to thinking about like, what is Elise excited for this month? And what is she grateful for this month? And she stopped doing it at the end of the year. And I was so sad because it was one of those things that I was like, this was actually something that I looked forward to on the first of every month. And she had no idea. I never told her. And then a couple months ago, she picked it back up again after I had actually started writing 3 things I was thankful for every day. And she picked it up back again. And I messaged her and I said, Elise, you influenced how I view this year. And you actually starting this project has been something that I have cultivated in my own life. And just because I'm not at the point of sharing it publicly on my story doesn't mean that I still don't want to know what you're doing and what you're thankful for, because this has been an incredible influence to others. And she just, liked the message and moved on. But it was one of those, she probably did more than that. But it was one of those things where she may not have seen the full impact on my life. And yet during a season when I was going through a lot of things and didn't have a great sense of gratitude, she was someone who was influencing me in a way that I had to say, I need to be more like her. And I need to say, I'm going to be grateful for these things. And she was modeling it in a really cool way for me. And I think social media can do that. We can see new things and new ways of modeling aspects that we want in our own life, whether that's, affirmations or gratitude. And I think those are things that we can do well and be excited about other people doing. But we also have to affirm those things. We have to say, these are things that are influencing my life for the good, and share those with people. Otherwise, we don't know that it's doing any good. We don't know that someone's going to be disappointed when January 1, nobody knows what Elise is grateful for.
That's hilarious. So she was doing it all of 2021.
Yeah, she was doing it all of 2021. Yeah.
Wow. So now you're like, hey, I know they're big shoes to fill, but I guess if I have to, I might just head in there, toss a little sauce on it and whatnot, and it'll be Sabrina-fied.
Yeah, maybe at the end of the year, I'll post a whole big gratitude thing.
Yeah. 365 things I was grateful for this year.
Let's refine it a little and cultivate it.
Maybe less than 365. Well, but I guess I would hope people have something to be grateful for, each and every day. Time's kind of wrapping up here and stuff. Brian just told us, he's like, you have 5 minutes or else. Okay, he didn't say it like that, but we're talking about hey, this is how you can kind of handle and control your social media and stuff. But I think there could be someone, who's watching or listening, and social media has been something that's been really bad for them, and they actually are struggling with depression or anxiety, and social media has led a lot to that. And I feel we'd be like amiss if we said all these stuff about social media and we're hyping it up and we're playing it up, and then maybe someone's out there and they're like, well, now I feel bad for thinking that this was the problem. And I think it's one of those things. It's kind of like it's like I think of like lighters and matches and stuff. Like I've never like really owned a lighter until about a year and a half ago. I started doing like this thing at Kalu where every Wednesday I would bring food for like the freshmen and stuff. I don't do it anymore. It was kind of like in the COVID season kind of thing. And so you need a lighter to light your coals and stuff and, get the grill going. And then recently, I was at a bonfire with some friends and, the quickest way to start a fire was someone just brought matches, threw them on the fire, etc. We had lighter fluid, all the stuff. Matches and lighters are great and valuable and helpful for me in terms of like trying to do like good ministry and like make burgers or, do bonfires and stuff. But for some people, like fire could be something that triggers really bad memories for them. Fire could be something that has caused pain for you in the past. Like maybe it's you personally, maybe it's in your family. We had fires here a couple years ago that really devastated our community. Less than 24 hours after a mass shooting, and so like I want to be sensitive to that and say like maybe for some people like you actually do need to take some time off of social media. Maybe that time is indefinite, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with social media. I think it just means that it's not good for you right now. But I think it's don't just stop doing one thing, but also start doing something else. Yeah. I think there's no shame in therapy. I say, hey, therapy and theology. I stole that one, from someone else. But hey, theology and therapy, find a good Christian counselor who you can talk to, comes from a biblical worldview. Put yourself in community, like we've talked about small groups a couple times, with people who you can talk to about the deeper reasons of why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. And then ask for prayer. And then remove access. So it's CPR, confess to people, P, pray, and then R, remove access. I stole that one too. And then, theology and therapy. But I think you'll probably say this in a much more eloquent way because you've, experienced this personally. It's like maybe you could say a quick word to the people.
I think it's fascinating that you used even the example of fire as someone who was one of the Woolsey fire victims. I think that was actually something that really stopped a lot of my social media usage in some ways, and also became something that I didn't want social media to become a crutch for me in that season. And yet some of my dearest friends were the most encouraging through social media. And so how did I balance that was something that I constantly was walking through. And there were seasons when I said, I need to cut social media out. But in the wake of cutting social media out, I think one thing we forget is that's something that we gravitate to constantly when it's something that we have been using. And over time, that becomes less and less. And yet, I think we have this lofty idea of, cut social media, turn off your account, delete your account, whatever. But I think the back end of what we don't think about is, what are you going to fill that time with? And so one of the things that a mentor really encouraged me on was, okay, Sabrina, you need to stop social media for a season, but let's find productive things for you to fill that time with before you do that. And so whether that was for me joining a small group or saying, I'm not going to go on social media on Sundays because I'm going to dedicate that time to church, or I'm going to have a book that I read alongside someone else, so that when I want to go to pull something in those in-between moments, I'm pulling a book or I'm pulling something that I know someone else will talk to me about, rather than going to social media where I will just endlessly scroll, because that was something that I think in those seasons of trauma or depression or anxiety, we really do lean on it as a crutch. And so what are we going to use as healthy crutches instead? And so I think that is something that we definitely have to think about is, what are the other influences that we're going to fill that space with rather than social media when we recognize it's not a healthy thing to fall back on.
Yeah. Do you feel like it was good? It was a good season. It was helpful.
It was good. It was hard. I won't deny that. It was a really hard season to walk through that. And I think I'm still 4 years later learning how to do that. But it's something that having those healthy influences of people that have walked that journey alongside me have really benefited me in that. And I've learned a lot from them in that season too.
Yeah. And that's so great. I mean, I love that. And everything we're saying, this is all easier said than done.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't want to be, what's that word? Like armchair theologians?
Yes,
or armchair, like it's hard, but we're in it together though. Like we're all trying to figure this thing out. And so I think we should pray.
So we talked a little bit about what books that I have found really helpful. And one of the ones that I have absolutely loved, and my small group can attest to this because this is how we open small group every week, was the liturgies and what we have had people praying for hundreds of years. But there's been this resurgence of liturgies that are new authors that are coming out. And one of the really great ones is by a congregation, and it's titled Every Moment Holy. And I would highly recommend it. But there's a liturgy in there for consuming media. So I just thought I would pray us out and read that one. So this is a liturgy before consuming media. O discerning Spirit, who alone judges all things rightly, now be present in my mind and active in my imagination as I prepare to engage with the claims and questions of my culture, incarnate in the stories that people tell. Let me experience mediums of art and expression, neither as a passive consumer nor as an entertainment glutton, but rather as one who might, through such works, would be more fully and compassionately enter into this ongoing human conversation of mystery and meaning, wonder and beauty, good and evil, sorrow and joy, fear and love. All truth is your truth, O Lord, and all beauty is your beauty. Therefore, use human expressions of celebration and longing as a catalyst to draw my mind towards ever deeper insight, my imagination into new and wonderful awe, and my heartbeat closer to rhythms of your own. Shape my vision by your fixed perceptions and tutor me, Holy Spirit, that I might learn to discern the difference between those stories that are whole, echoing the greater narrative of your redemption, and those that are bent or broken, failing to trace accurately the patterns of your eternal thoughts, and so failing to name rightly the true condition of humanity in all creation. Grant me wisdom to divide rightly, to separate form from content, craft from narrative, meaning from emotion. Bless me with the great discernment to be able to celebrate the stamp of your divine image revealed in an excellence of craft and artistry, even while grieving the placency of meaning and hope in the same work. Guard my mind against the entrancement to believe a simple lie because of its beautifully told. Let me not be careless. Give me right conviction to judge my own motives in that which I approve, teaching me to be always mindful of that which I consume and thoughtfully of the ways in which I consume it. Impart in me keener knowledge of the limits of my own heart in light of my own particular brokenness, then I might choose what would be for my flourishment and not for my harm. And give me the grace to understand that what causes me to stumble might bear no ill convenience to another of your children, so that while I am to care for my brothers and sisters, I must also allow them, in manners of conscience, the freedom to sometimes choose things your Spirit convicts me to refrain from. Even so, let my own freedoms in Christ never be flaunted or exercised in such a way as to give cause for confession, confusion, temptation, or stumbling in others. May the stories I partake of and the ways in which I engage with them make me, in the end, more empathetic, Christ-bearer, more compassionate, more aware of my own brokenness and need for grace. Better be able to understand the hopes and fears and feelings of my human fellows so that I may more authentically live and learn and love among them. On to the end, that all our many stories might somehow be more beautifully woven into our greater story. Amen.
Amen. No better way to end it. That's so good.
Yeah, so